everyone, and welcome to episode 1 of Tolkien Talks. It's happening, guys. It's finally happening. I'm finally reading it. Lord of the Rings being it. It's happening. I read chapter 1, and now I'm gonna talk about it. So let's get started with a little recap of chapter 1, A Long Expected Party. Which, as you can see, I have notes on and everything, but I'm not gonna read them for the recap because that would be cheating. This is my own show. I make up my own rules. It's not cheating, but it would take too long. Keep in mind, I did not read the prologue. I didn't realize there was a prologue because in this edition there's like a lot of stuff before, so I just kept flipping to chapter 1 instead of seeing what was there before. It was a bunch of essays and then a prologue. So keep in mind I did not read the prologue, but it was basically a recap of what happened to Bilbo a little bit, and it's a recap of how the rings were forged, I believe, because that was the prologue in the movie as well. It's an explainer on hobbits. That's what the prologue is. You can read it if you want. I'm not gonna. So, for the recap. So basically, what happens in chapter 1 is Bilbo Baggins is about to turn 11 or 111, and he's gonna have a party, as all hobbits do in the Shire. All hobbits have parties and give out gifts. So, that's basically the whole of it. But there's more to it, obviously. So the chapter opens with people kind of talking. First, it opens with the narrator talking about Bilbo Baggins, and then it jumps to the Shire folk, the other hobbits, talking about Bilbo and how he hasn't aged and how enormous his wealth is and how he's such a curious creature, but it's all good. And we get introduced to Sam's dad, which is nice. We never saw any family of Sam's in the movie, so that was cool to see. Yeah, it's just a lot of talk about the strange goings-on and how peculiar Bilbo is for a hobbit. And then it jumps to Gandalf arriving about a month before the party. All the kids are excited, but Gandalf is strictly there for Bilbo. He's not going to talk to anyone. He's not going to do anything. He's on strictly party business. So then he goes and he chats with Bilbo, and Bilbo seems to have a plan of some sort that's going to happen during the party. And it is a joint birthday party with Bilbo and Frodo because they have the same birthday. So then that's all of the lead up to the party, and then the party happens. There are a lot of hobbits invited to the party, and everyone's very happy with their gifts, but some are a little bit critical, as people are with things that make other people happy, because they came from out of town, which I do think is an important detail because it shows that Bilbo is still in contact with out-of-towners, which most people from the Shire are not in touch with people from out of town, and that clearly alludes to Bilbo's adventures in The Hobbit and all of that good stuff. I think that's an important detail, that the gifts Bilbo is giving out are very different than the gifts hobbits would usually get during one of these parties. So then the party's happening, everyone's having a grand old time. Gandalf is there doing some fireworks. Everyone's finishing up eating, or filling up the corners, as they call it. I think it's like the post-dessert. It's like this is like after like a family friend dinner get-together sort of thing. Like after dinner, we've played a few card games, we've had some fun, and then like someone's like, so cha, anyone? And everyone's like, yes, we want cha, because that's just how Indians work. And then everyone's munching on something and drinking some tea, and it's a good time. And that's what it sounds like filling up the corners is. And then Bilbo gets up and begins his speech with a capital S, and makes some backhanded compliments towards the hobbits, and the hobbits don't quite get those compliments. Or they don't they're not sure whether they're insults or compliments, which is the point, because I read that sentence 3 times and I couldn't get it, which is Tolkien. He's an English scholar. This is what he does. He's like, I haven't gotten to know half of you as well as I want to, and like is pretty nice even to the Sackville Bagginses who lost out on Bag End pre-book, post-Hobbit. They lost out to the property of Bag End. He's talking, being fairly nice to people, and everyone's having a jolly good time, and then he's like, despite the fact that I don't know you as well as I want to, and I want to spend more time with you, this is the end, and then he disappears. And then we switch finally to Frodo's perspective, where Frodo is a bit lost for words. He knew this was going to happen. He knew this was the big plan, the big surprise at the end, that Bilbo was going to leave, but all of a sudden he's just filled with so much affection for his uncle and the person who raised him, and he is just quite sad and a little despondent, and he's not talking to any of the party guests or anything. And then that's all we see of Frodo, and then we cut to the inside of Bag End again, where Bilbo is preparing to leave. He's reappeared in Bag End. No hobbit has seen him, and Gandalf is there, and they're talking about his plans to leave and how Gandalf really wants Bilbo to follow through on all of his plans. And then Gandalf asks about a ring. It's called Lord of the Rings. Bilbo's like, yeah, I put it in this envelope on the mantle. And then he's like, oh wait, no, it's still in my pocket, but why should I get rid of it? Why, it's mine. It came to me, my precious. Obviously you can't hear the voice in this, and I think it says that it came out in a strange way, but obviously not in the strangled, my precious sort of way that we see with in the movies with Bilbo at the beginning, and then later when we meet Smeagol / Gollum, and that's where the voice comes from. Clearly I've been influenced by the movies. Could you tell that I really like the movies? In the end, Gandalf does end up getting the ring out of Bilbo's hands. I can't remember how. And it ends up in the house while Bilbo goes away. And then we get to the third act, I kind of want to say, or I guess the fourth act. I guess it's still the third, because, like, first act was the lead up to the party, second act was party and Bilbo disappearing, and the immediate aftermath of that, and then third act is what everyone gets now that Bilbo is gone. And that's where Frodo inherits basically everything, and Frodo inherits basically everything, but everyone is kind of left happy except for the Sackville Bagginses, who got, like, spoons. And then I believe that's the end of the chapter, but let me double check. Yeah. And in this part, we also go back to Frodo's perspective, and we see that Frodo is still just very upset that his uncle is gone, and he doesn't care about any of the stuff he's received. He just wants his uncle back, and he really misses him. And it's very sweet. The end. End recap. That took forever. Yeah, so that is what happened in the first chapter. It was a lot. A lot happened, or maybe I just made it long-winded, but you know what? Tolkien makes it even more long-winded, so it's fine, I think, for me to make it long-winded. So yeah, that's what happened in chapter 1 of Lord of the Rings. The way I kind of want to structure this a little bit is I want to talk about my favorite parts, and then my less favorite parts, and then do kind of a literary analysis sort of deal. If you guys listen to Harry Potter and the Sacred Text, something kind of like exploring the book through the chapter through a theme, or sometimes looking at a specific passage that I really loved and doing a bit of close reading, literary analysis, English majory things that I really love doing. And then I will probably end off on a favorite quote. So first, I want to talk about my favorite parts of this chapter. So my favorite part was probably sassy Bilbo. Bilbo is so sassy and so backhanded, and he's just so, you know, in the West Wing when it like Bartlett makes a joke, or just like, you know what, any character in the West Wing, because it's all just like they're just on another kind of plane of intelligence, and it's all very fast talking, and like also Gilmore Girls, like their jokes are very fast talking, and like it's like a blink and you miss it sort of joke when you're listening to it, but reading it you can take your time with it, which I really liked. And Bilbo is just, I could just like sit and just appreciate the way Tolkien uses language with Bilbo, and how we don't hear a lot from Bilbo or even Frodo in this chapter, but we get such a good sense of their character based on mostly the speech and what Bilbo wrote. So I kind of want to look at the place where he writes his will. So this is his will where everyone gets something, and you guys know how wills work. Why am I explaining this? Actually, all of the things that he was giving away were tagged with what everyone was getting. So it says for Adelard, so this is on page 37 of this 50th anniversary paperback edition. So this says, for Adelard took for his very own from Bilbo on an umbrella. Adelard had carried off many unlabeled ones. So it's just like, it's one of those I see you sort of things. And like it goes on, for Dora Baggins in memory of a long correspondence. With love, Bilbo, on a large waste paper basket. Dora was Drogo's sister, blah, 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 blah. She had written reams of good advice for more than half a century. And Bilbo is giving her a trash can. Like, can you imagine someone writes to you so much advice with such love and care, and the last thing you want them to know about you, the very last thing, the last memory they'll ever have of you, is the knowledge that you threw out every single thing they wrote to you. It's savage. And then with the Sackville Bagginses, he does, for one of the Sackville Bagginses, he does give spoons because he thought that she stole all of his spoons. So he was like, you know what, take them. And then Lobelia, Sackville Baggins, was obviously offended, but still took them. So it's just like so great. And like, I wish I could be that savage. Sassy Bilbo is brilliant. So good. I probably should have done The Hobbit for Tolkien Talks, shouldn't I have? Shouldn't I have? So the second thing I really loved about this chapter was the way the narrator shows affection for characters, because it's interesting because the book is told in third person, but it's very clear that the narrator has a perspective, because the entire first paragraph is just the narrator speaking. No one else is talking. There's no dialogue. There's no internal thought monologue from anyone else. It's very clear that there is a perspective, which I really like. One way Tolkien actually does this is with parentheticals. So just the final sentence in the second paragraph, the one that starts with Bilbo was very rich and very peculiar, it ends with, there were some that shook their heads and thought this was too much of a good thing. It seemed unfair that anyone should possess, apparently, perpetual youth as well as reputedly inexhaustible wealth. It's very clear that the narrator has some sort of bias just by that sentence, that the narrator is willing to question what the hobbits believe is fact, what the people of the Shire believe is fact, which is that he has inexhaustible wealth and that he has perpetual youth. But it's also interesting that, like, it's not an omniscient narrator that knows already about this ring that's giving him the perpetual youth and his adventures that gave him the inexhaustible fortune. Or at least the narrator is letting us figure that out ourselves. It's just a really interesting narrator, which I really like. It's also very clear that the narrator has affection. I'm referring to the narrator as a he because there are no female characters in these books except for like one or two. And the guy who wrote this was a guy. So I'm just referring to the narrator as he, but feel free to use they, them pronouns or whatever you want for the narrator, because we don't know who the narrator is. I don't believe the narrator becomes a character. It's still a third-person narrator. It's clear that he has a lot of affection for the hobbits because of both the things the narrator chose to quote. I know this sounds weird, but bear with me. So, the narrator decides to give voice to Ham-Gamgee, commonly known as the Gaffer. What was I going with this? So, the narrator sides with Bilbo in the sense that he, too, has affection for Ham-Gamgee, because the Gaffer, aka Ham-Gamgee, is talking about Bilbo with affection, and that's the quote the narrator chose to include in the description of the talkings between the hobbits. Obviously, there's a lot of chatter going around about Bilbo and what's going on, but the narrator, he chose to paint Ham and Bilbo in favorable lights, despite calling them peculiar at times, which is why it says, "A very nice, well-spoken, gentle hobbit is Mr. Bilbo, as I've always said." With, the Gaffer declared, and then this is the narrator talking, "with perfect truth. For Bilbo was very polite to him, calling him Master Hamfast and consulting him constantly upon the growing of vegetables." So that little section really, it zones in on how the narrator just has a slant, has a perspective, and sees the good in Bilbo and Ham because he chooses to treat them both with more dignity than, say, the Sackville Bagginses, who are just the worst. They're greedy, they just want Bag End, they steal silver spoons, and I'm sure the Sackville Bagginses have good things about them too, but it's very clear that we're already rooting for Sam Gamgee because of this first introduction of the Gamgees, which is him speaking nicely about Bilbo because Bilbo has always treated him with respect. Do you see? Do you see what's going on here? I think you guys will get it. This is so much easier with a roundtable class and everyone talking at the same time and me just like raising my hands and doing a little thought and a little thought there and a little thought there. It's hard with just a camera, but we're getting through it. One more thing I wanted to talk about that was interesting. Despite me not reading the prologue, I found the opening of this story, the first chapter, to be very similar to the opening of the first Harry Potter book. And also many other Harry Potter books open outside of the real story. So the real story of the Sorcerer's Stone is obviously Harry discovering he's a wizard and going to Hogwarts and defeating Professor Quirrell / Voldy. That's the main story of Harry Potter, and also making friends. That's the main story. But it starts with Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. And it describes the day the Potters died from their perspective of Petunia and Vernon. And that's how the story starts. And it's very interesting that J.K. Rowling used that method that Tolkien uses in this book. The end of the first chapter of Harry Potter is Harry appearing at their front steps. And it's very interesting that the same thing kind of happens here, where This is probably one of the only chapters where we're in the Shire and deep in the Shire politics of who's strange, who's greedy, and like this is the last time we'll see Ham Gamgee, who is officially my favorite character. It's very interesting that happens where we're kind of outside of the world that the rest of the story is going to take place in. But I think it's important because it's a way into the story for the reader. Because I can relate to the goings on of the Shire. There is like friendship politics all over the place with every friend group everywhere. Like I can like the gossip is everywhere, and that's the first scene of this book is gossip. It's people chatting about Bilbo and how weird he is and how he's gonna have a party. Everyone's been there, and then everyone's been at a party, and as I said before, I could so relate to the filling up the corners thing because that's what we do. That's what brown people do. We eat food, we hang out, and then we have like chai and dessert and loads of other things. That's what we do. But it's a way into the story. Like with J.K. Rowling, our way into the story is through the Muggles whose only wish and only desire is to be normal. And God, if I haven't felt that way. They're places we've all been, although maybe not to that level where Petunia and Vernon want to be normal to an extreme, but that's also because Petunia's been through extreme circumstances of her sister being a witch. And there's a bit of an extreme with Bilbo disappearing, but we've all had bad experiences at parties and talked about it the next day, which is what's going on here. This first chapter could have been a realistic fiction story if were it not for the one wizard in it. If Gandalf weren't there, this could be the opening to any story ever. It could have been a murder mystery. It could have been, there was this great party. There was loads of gossip in the town about this party beforehand, and then during the party, everyone was having a grand old time, and then the host disappeared. What happened to the host? It's a very relatable thing that they both opened with, and I thought that was really interesting and really intelligent. As much as I'm tired of J.K. Rowling right now, I'll give her props for the original 7 Harry Potter book series. I give her props for that. I just kept noticing it while reading this chapter, and I had to talk about it, and I love Harry Potter, guys. It's great. Oh, and I did want to talk about another bit of foreshadowing before I end this. This is when Ham Gamgee is talking about his son Sam and how he's always in Bag End, hanging out with his buddy Frodo. Elves and dragons, I says to him. Cabbages and potatoes are better for me and you. Don't go getting mixed up in the business of your betters, or you'll land in trouble too big for you, I says to him. Foreshadowing. Sam, you're gonna do better than anyone else. You're the best, Sam. I love you. So, now onto my not-so-favorite things. One of my not-so-favorite things is the Sackville Bagginses. I kind of felt bad for them this chapter. They aren't given the nicest edit by the narrator. And if those of you who watch the Bachelor franchise like I do know what an edit means, but for those of you who don't, an edit is when a bad edit is when someone is turned into the villain to fit the storyline, even though in real life they may not have been the villain. They may have just been doing ordinary things, maybe some not so good things, but it's taken to an extreme with the way they are edited to appear on our screens. And I feel like that's sort of happening with the Sackville Bagginses and the way the narrator is including them in this story. We're seeing the version of the Sackville Bagginses where all they want is Bag End, and they're very greedy and they steal spoons. However, there were moments in here where I felt bad for the Sackville Bagginses because they were only invited to this party to fill out the amount of people Bilbo wanted at the party. Like, that's not a great feeling. And yeah, maybe you really wanted that house and that property, but maybe you moved on, and maybe it's Bilbo who's rubbing it in a little bit, and who keeps rubbing it in, and that's why you don't like Bilbo and you see Frodo as the enemy because you hate Bilbo so much. There are justifications to the way they are written that aren't in the story that are my brain going, I sense a bad edit. It's like Jordan, the male model in the last season of The Bachelorette. He was a jerk, according to us, during that whole season. Like, he seemed awful. But then during Paradise, we saw a whole new side of him where he was in love with this girl, and he was listening to her, and it was beautiful, and I feel like the Sackville Bagginses deserve a Bachelor in Paradise redemption. That's all I'm saying. Oh, this is what happens when I don't script my videos. The second thing that was kind of my less favorite thing was also the way the narrator was treating people. I thought it was frustrating that the narrator kept talking down to the hobbits. He was very condescending toward the hobbits, and maybe it's justified, maybe they are just a simple-minded folk, and that's all they are. And, like, given the gravity of the rest of the book, I'm sure it makes sense, but in the context of just this chapter, it's a little unfair. The area that it frustrated me the most was when Ham Gamgee was talking about the queerness of Bilbo, and how he drowned. And that's the only time I'm reading a word that sounds like an English word, just slightly altered, to make it sound dumbed down. Everything else is in regular English, everything else in this chapter is in regular, understandable English, except for that word. And then Gaffer says, oh, he drowned. And then, drowned, said several voices. They had heard this and other darker rumors before, of course, but hobbits have a passion for family history, and they were ready to hear it again. The narrator's such a jerk in that moment. These people are just having a good time listening to stories that they've heard a million times. I tell stories a million times. People listen to my stories a million times if they're my friends/family and they have to. And sometimes they enjoy hearing a story again and again. Like, there's this hilarious story of this one Christmas, and Lata Mangeshkar is involved. It's hilarious. I've heard this story a million times, and I was there when it happened. It's still hilarious, and people are allowed to enjoy themselves. And I was just so angry at that moment. Like, why are you raining on their parade? Why are you stopping them from having a good time listening to just family history? Why are you stopping them from doing that? And why are you using that word drowned, dear narrator, when everything else, every other quotation, every other thing is in regular English? Like, the only reason to use that version of the word drowned is to indicate how uneducated they are. And it frustrates me. It's classist. It's what it is. The narrator is a pretty classist. Not a little bit classist, pretty classist. And it's like the way people make fun of AAVE, African American Vernacular English. It's when people make fun of that type of language because it's not real grammar and it's not regular grammar and it's not following all of the rules. And, like, guess what? English evolves. And people, like, I feel like as long as the person who is listening to you, as long as your intended audience understands what you are saying, it does not matter how you talk. To an extent. Obviously, like, be nice to people and all that. But as long as you're getting the point across, it's fine. It's fine if you sometimes say words a little differently. And I feel like the choice to use that term was judgment placed on the hobbits. And it was unfair judgment. I think there's a lot of fair judgment of the hobbits in this chapter, but this was an unfair judgment. End rant. Okay. Exhausting. And I haven't even gotten to the fun part yet of this, which is a little bit of literary analysis. I think I alluded to this a little bit during my recap of this, but I want to talk about the concept of wealth in The Hobbit. In the first chapter of Lord of the Rings. It's getting late, guys. A lot of this chapter has to do with wealth. One of the first things you hear about Bilbo, other than the fact that he is well preserved, before even the fact that he is well preserved and that he looks great for 11T1, is that he is rich. So, let me just read you the first 2 sentences. When Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 11th birthday with a party of special magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton. So, establishing setting, establishing, that's an establishing opening sentence. And then, the first description of Bilbo ever. Bilbo was very rich and very peculiar, and had been the wonder of the Shire for 60 years, ever since his remarkable disappearance and unexpected return. Bilbo was very rich, is the first thing we hear about Bilbo Baggins in this book. And that's very important, I think. It's important because, first of all, a lot of this chapter revolves around the fact that Bilbo is wealthy, and the fact that he's giving things away to people, and the fact that this party is magnificent, and there are riches that hobbits haven't seen before. But I also think it's important because it establishes Frodo's role in Hobbiton. Frodo is the upper class in Hobbiton. He is the 1%. Frodo is about to be richer than he ever wanted to be, clearly, because he just wants his uncle back. But it's more than that. It's establishing that Frodo is a very big fish in this small pond. Everyone knows who Bilbo Baggins is. Everyone knows he owns Bag End, which clearly, if the Sackville Bagginses want it so much, is a pretty nice property. And everyone knows that he came back with these riches, and he hasn't aged at all, and Frodo has to be popular because of that. I don't think there's any talk of, what sort of schooling these people go through when they're young or anything, but to his fellow peers in grade school, or whatever the equivalent in the Shire is, Bilbo was probably a big deal. Everyone knows about his uncle, his adoptive father, and how rich he is. That's what everyone knows about him. Bilbo is an eccentric billionaire. Bilbo is like Tony Stark or Mr. Lemoncello. I love that that's the first reference I can think of outside of Tony Stark, because I work at a children's bookstore. But yes, I think Mr. Lemoncello works actually better than Tony Stark. Because Mr. Lemoncello is an eccentric billionaire who creates a library and makes a contest that's very Willy Wonka-esque. Sounds like Bilbo a little bit, right? Bilbo is the eccentric billionaire of the town. He's the richest guy there. Everyone wants to be invited to this party, even the people who are a little bit skeptical of him. Everyone thinks he's a little weird. Everyone thinks he's a little cuckoo. Things are queer up in here. But that doesn't stop everyone from wanting to be there. That doesn't stop this. Just because the Sackville Bagginses don't like Bilbo doesn't mean they're not going to show up and be that last number in the gross that creates the 144 guests. And that's so important when you think of the fact that later on in the story, Frodo's the one who volunteers to carry the ring because he thinks he can do it. Now, Obviously, we love Frodo. Frodo's very humble and very sweet. But I think the Frodo in this book, the Frodo that's being introduced here as the rich nephew and the sole heir of the Baggins fortune is the one that volunteers to take the ring, not the lovely, humble one who just wants to help. Obviously, he also wants to help, but there's a certain confidence to it that Sam Gamgee does not have, you know, that Merry and Pippin don't have because they didn't grow up being Frodo freaking Baggins, King of the Shire, or the Prince of the Shire, you know? And I just think that's very important. I was going to do a slightly closer reading of that, but this video is already long enough, and I feel like I've given you guys examples of the wealth in this chapter already. I don't think I need to rehash that, and I think I got my argument across, which is the point in an English paper. This isn't an English paper, and I keep having to remember that. This is a YouTube video. And it's just me chatting at my phone camera with a siren in the background at 11 p.m. All right. So yes, things are important. And finally, I think you guys know my favorite quote from this chapter already, but this, I do want to end every episode on my favorite quotation from the chapter. So, my favorite quotation from this chapter. So, this is on page 22 of my 50th anniversary one-volume paperback. So, this is my favorite quotation from the chapter. "But what about this Frodo that lives with him?" asked Old Noakes of Bywater. "Baggins is his name, but he's more than half a brandybuck, they say. It beats me why any Baggins of Hobbiton should go looking for a wife away there in Buckland, where folks are so queer." "And no wonder they're queer," put in Daddy Two-Foot, the gaffer's next-door neighbor. "If they live on the wrong side of the Brandywine River, and right agin the old forest, that's a dark bad place, if half the tales be true." "You're right, Dad," said the gaffer. "Not that the Brandybucks of Buckland live in the old forest, but they're a queer breed, seemingly. They fool about with boats on that big river, and that isn't natural. Small wonder that trouble came of it, I say. Yeah. So much queerness already. It's so beautiful. I love it. So far, I'm really enjoying this reread. I am looking forward to chapter 2. So, guys, I will see you again in 2 weeks for chapter 2 of Lord of the Rings. Let's see what it's called. What are you called? The long expected party is pretty long. You are called The Shadow of the Past. But yeah, I will see you guys next time, guys. This was so much fun. Alright, bye! Special thanks to Jay Patel, John E. Norum, Carl Raymond, Shrenik Shah, and Chris Lawrence for being my patrons. If you would like to support my video work, head on over to my Patreon and check out the perks.